The first gunshot came at dawn, startling Violet Nash from an already restless sleep. It wasn't an uncommon sound in Silver Creek, Nebraska Territory, 1867, but it was the second gunshot, followed by the pounding of boots on her porch, that made her blood run cold. "Mrs. Nash, you best come quick." The voice belonged to Emmett Faulkner, the town's only doctor. "It's Thomas." Violet's hands trembled as she threw a shawl over her nightgown and rushed to the door. Thomas had only been gone since yesterday morning, riding to a neighboring farm to sell 2 of their horses. He'd promised to be back by nightfall. The scene at the doctor's modest surgery confirmed her worst fears. Thomas Nash, her husband of just 18 months, lay still on the table, blood soaking through a makeshift bandage on his chest. His face, once ruddy with life and laughter, was ashen. "Road agents," Dr. Faulkner explained, his voice low. "Sheriff found him at Elk Creek Crossing. Horse was gone, money too." Violet stood frozen, her 22 years of life suddenly feeling like 100. "Is he?" The doctor placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Nash." He was gone before they brought him in. The following weeks passed in a fog of grief. Violet moved through each day mechanically, tending to the small farm she and Thomas had worked so hard to build. But without Thomas's strength and know-how, the daily tasks overwhelmed her. The drought that summer didn't help matters, turning their once promising fields into a wasteland of withered crops. By early autumn, Violet faced the harsh reality that had befallen many widows in the West. The bank note for the farm equipment Thomas had purchased was due, and she had nothing to pay it with. When Sheriff Parker arrived with the foreclosure notice, Violet received it with dry eyes. She'd cried herself empty weeks ago. "I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Nash," the sheriff said, removing his hat. "If there was any other way." "What will happen now?" Violet asked, her voice hollow. "Well, madam, the bank will take the property. As for you," the sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "The town councils decided to hold an auction for your services." Violet's head snapped up. "An auction? What sort of services?" "Domestic ones, madam. Cooking, cleaning, mending. Towns full of bachelors who could use a woman's touch around their homes. It's better than the alternative." The alternative? They didn't need to spell it out. The alternative was the brothel at the edge of town, where widows and abandoned wives often ended up when they had nowhere else to go. "When?" was all she could manage to ask. "Saturday, 10 o'clock, Town Square." Saturday arrived with a bitter wind that cut through Violet's threadbare coat as she stood on the wooden platform that had been hastily constructed in the town square. Her few possessions, a trunk of clothing, her mother's silver hairbrush, Thomas's pocket watch, sat at her feet. Mayor Willard, a portly man with small, greedy eyes, stood beside her. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we're offering the domestic services of Mrs. Violet Nash, widow of the late Thomas Nash. Mrs. Nash is skilled in cooking, sewing, and general housekeeping. The contract is for 1 year of service, renewable at the employer's discretion. Bidding starts at $20. Violet kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to look at the faces of the townspeople who had come to bid on her, as if she were no more than livestock. Her hands, clasped tightly before her, were the only outward sign of her inner turmoil. $20, called out Harold Burnside, owner of the general store. He was a widower with 5 unruly children. $25, countered Samuel Webb, an elderly rancher whose arthritis had left him unable to care for himself properly. The bidding continued, each amount driving home the humiliating reality of her situation. $30, $40, $50. $75, called a deep voice from the back of the crowd. The gathering parted, revealing a tall figure on horseback. The man dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jingling as he approached the platform. Violet found herself looking into the face of a stranger, a man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, and the way he carried himself spoke of a quiet confidence. "Noah Granger," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "I'm bidding $75 for Mrs. Nash's contract." Mayor Willard's eyes lit up at the unexpectedly high bid. "Do I hear 80? The crowd murmured, but no one spoke up. 75 going once, twice, sold to Mr. Granger. The transaction was completed with shocking efficiency. Noah Granger counted out the money, signed the paperwork, and then turned to Violet with an expression she couldn't quite read. "My wagon's just over there," he said, gesturing to a well-maintained buckboard at the edge of the square. "I'll load your things." Violet followed in numb silence as he carried her trunk. When they reached the wagon, he helped her up to the seat with unexpected gentleness. "Where?" her voice caught, and she had to start again. "Where are we going, Mr. Granger?" Noah settled beside her and took up the reins. "My ranch." "About 3 hours' ride north of here." "And what will be expected of me there?" Violet asked, steeling herself for his answer. He glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "Just what was agreed upon. Cooking, cleaning, I've got a big house that needs tending to. Nothing else." She pressed, needing to be absolutely clear. Noah's eyes met hers directly. "No, Mrs. Nash, nothing else. I don't buy women for that." He clicked to the horses and added, almost as an afterthought, "Home awaits, and I reckon we both could use one." As the wagon pulled away from Silver Creek, Violet felt a tangle of emotions: fear, uncertainty, but also the faintest flicker of something she hadn't felt in months: hope. The journey to Noah Granger's ranch passed mostly in silence. Violet kept stealing glances at the man beside her, trying to make sense of him. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with a lean, muscular build that spoke of a life of physical labor. His profile was strong, straight nose, square jaw shadowed with stubble, and a mouth that seemed more accustomed to stern lines than smiles. "You're not from Silver Creek," she finally said, more statement than question. "No, madam, I've got a place north of Scottsbluff. Just happened to be in town on business." What kind of business brings a rancher to an auction for a widow's services? The words came out more sharply than she'd intended, but Noah didn't seem offended. "Wasn't planning on it," he admitted. "I was at the mercantile when I overheard talk about the auction. Didn't sit right with me." Violet studied him, trying to discern if this was truth or merely what he thought she wanted to hear. "So you spent $75 on a stranger out of, what, the goodness of your heart?" A faint smile touched his lips. "My mother would have my hide if she knew I stood by while a lady was being auctioned off like a prize heifer. Besides, I wasn't lying about needing help with the house." The terrain gradually changed as they traveled, the flat plains giving way to gently rolling hills. Cottonwood trees lined the banks of a winding creek, their leaves shimmering gold in the afternoon sun. In the distance, the bluffs that gave the nearby town its name rose dramatically against the vast Nebraska sky. "How big is your ranch?" Violet asked after another long stretch of silence. 500 acres, give or take, runs from the creek up to the ridge line. "Got about 200 head of cattle, some horses." "And you manage all that alone?" Noah shook his head. "Got 2 hands that help with the stock. Brothers Louis and Marco Mendoza, good men, they've got a cabin on the property. But no one to help with the house. Had a housekeeper until last month, Mrs. Abernathy. She moved east to be with her daughter's family." He glanced at Violet. "House has been getting away from me since then." As they crested a small rise, Noah's ranch came into view. A substantial 2-story house of timber and stone stood proudly against the backdrop of the bluffs. A large barn, corral, and several outbuildings completed the picture. It was grander than Violet had expected, speaking of prosperity and permanence. "You built all this yourself?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. "Not alone. Started with just the barn and a 1-room cabin 6 years ago. Added on as I could. The main house has only been finished about a year." When they reached the yard, Noah brought the wagon to a stop and came around to help Violet down. Up close, the house was even more impressive, solid and well-crafted, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. "I'll show you around, then get your things settled," Noah said, leading her up the porch steps. The interior of the house told a different story than its imposing exterior. While structurally sound and beautifully built, with polished wood floors and sturdy furniture, it clearly lacked a woman's touch. Dust lay thick on surfaces, dishes were stacked haphazardly in the large kitchen, and the curtains hung unevenly at the windows. "Been a bachelor too long," Noah said with a hint of embarrassment as he noticed her taking in the state of things. He showed her through the spacious main floor a formal parlor, dining room, kitchen, and study before leading her upstairs. 4 bedrooms up here, mine's at the end of the hall. Figured you'd want this one. He opened a door to reveal a bright, airy room with a large window overlooking the rolling pastureland. Has its own washroom attached. The room was simply but nicely furnished with a 4-poster bed, dresser, washstand, and a small writing desk by the window. The bed was made, but the rest of the room had the same neglected feel as the rest of the house. It's very nice, Violet said, genuinely impressed despite her circumstances. Get yourself settled. I need to check on some things in the barn. We can talk more about arrangements at supper. Noah hesitated at the door. Mrs. Nash, I know this isn't what you wanted, but I hope you'll be comfortable here. After he left, Violet stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed by the rapid changes in her fortunes. Just hours ago, she had been facing the humiliation of being auctioned off to the highest bidder in a town where she'd once been respected as Thomas Nash's wife. Now she found herself in a fine house, with a private bedroom and her own washroom luxuries she hadn't expected. Yet she was still essentially a servant, purchased for a year's labor by a man she didn't know. A man whose motives remained unclear to her despite his claims of chivalry. With a deep breath, Violet moved to the window. The view stretched for miles, rolling grassland dotted with cattle, the distant bluffs turning purple in the late afternoon light. It was beautiful, in a wild, open way that made her feel both insignificant and somehow free. When Noah returned an hour later, he found Violet in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, washing dishes. You don't need to start working right away, he said, startled to find her already tackling the mess. I prefer to be useful, she replied simply. And I can't prepare supper with dirty dishes everywhere. Noah nodded, accepting her reasoning. I usually just fry up whatever's easy after a day's work. I noticed, there are enough bacon grease stains on that stove to start a candle factory. The quip slipped out before she could stop herself, but to her relief, Noah's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Fair enough. What can I do to help? Violet was surprised by the offer. Thomas had never set foot in the kitchen except to eat. You could bring in some fresh water and stoke the fire. They worked side by side for a while, falling into an unexpectedly comfortable rhythm. While Noah fetched water and built up the fire in the cook stove, Violet took stock of the pantry. It was better supplied than she'd anticipated, with flour, sugar, coffee, canned goods, and even some dried fruit. You have a garden? She asked as she began preparing a simple meal of salt pork, potatoes, and the last of some canned green beans she'd found. Had a small one that Mrs. Abernathy kept up. It's gone to weeds now, I'm afraid. I could start one again in the spring, Violet said thoughtfully. I had a good garden at our farm. Noah looked up from where he was setting the table, another surprise. You're thinking that far ahead? Violet paused in her stirring. I'm here for a year, aren't I? Might as well make plans for it. Supper was a quiet affair, but not uncomfortably so. The food was simple but hot and well prepared, and Noah ate with obvious appreciation. Best meal I've had in weeks, he said as he pushed back his empty plate. Thank you. You're welcome. Violet folded her hands in her lap. Mr. Granger, I think we should discuss what you expect from me. Noah leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. Fair enough. I need someone to keep the house, cook meals, do laundry, general housekeeping. And my living conditions. Am I to take all my meals in the kitchen after serving you? Should I avoid being seen when you have company? His brow furrowed. No, nothing like that. You'll eat at the table with me. The house is big enough for both of us to live comfortably. As for company, I don't get much, except for Louis and Marco sometimes, or neighbors needing help. Violet nodded, relieved but still cautious. And my personal time, will I have any? Sundays are yours entirely. Otherwise, once your daily work is done, your time is your own. He hesitated. There's a small library in the study. Books are there to be read if you've a mind to. That's generous, Violet admitted, surprised by this unexpected perk. It's only fair. You're not a slave, Mrs. Nash. Noah's gaze was steady. You're a woman who's fallen on hard times, and I'm a man who needs help running his house. That's the beginning and end of it. As Violet prepared for bed that night in her new room, she found herself pondering Noah Granger. He was nothing like what she'd expected when she'd heard his bid at the auction. There was no hint of the lecherous intent she'd feared, nor the cold command of a man who viewed her as property. Instead, he seemed almost respectful. She wasn't naive enough to trust this apparent good fortune completely. Life had taught her that circumstances could change in an instant, that security was an illusion. But as she slipped between clean sheets in a room all her own, with a full stomach and without fear of what the morning would bring, Violet allowed herself a small measure of relief. Whatever Noah Granger's true intentions might be, for tonight at least, she was safe. The first rays of dawn were just breaking over the distant bluffs when Violet woke. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. The soft bed and spacious room were far from her cramped quarters at the farm. Then yesterday's events came rushing back and she sat up, taking stock of her new reality. She dressed quickly in one of her plain work dresses, fastened her dark hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, but the back door stood slightly ajar, and the aroma of coffee filled the kitchen. Through the window, she could see Noah in the barnyard, deep in conversation with two men who must be the Mendoza brothers. All three were dressed for work, and even from a distance, Violet could sense an easy camaraderie between them. She busied herself with breakfast preparations, finding eggs and bacon in the springhouse behind the kitchen. By the time Noah returned, she had a hearty meal waiting. "Morning," he said, removing his hat as he entered. "You're up early." "I'm used to farm hours," she replied, pouring him coffee. "I met your hands through the window. They seem nice. Lewis and Marco, best cowboys in the territory." Noah sat down at the table. "They wanted to know if the rumors were true." Violet stiffened. "Rumors? That I'd finally gotten someone to whip this house into shape." He must have noticed her discomfort because he added, "I told them you're a widow who's agreed to keep house for a year, nothing more, nothing less." "Thank you," she said quietly, serving him breakfast before taking her own seat. "We'll be moving cattle to the south pasture today," Noah informed her between bites. "Won't be back till late afternoon." He glanced around the kitchen. "Don't try to tackle the whole house in one day. It's a lot for one person." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Granger." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "I don't doubt that, Mrs. Nash, but Rome wasn't built in a day." After breakfast, Violet watched from the porch as Noah and the Mendoza brothers rode out, trailing several dogs behind them. The vastness of the ranch impressed her anew in the clear morning light. Fields stretched to the horizon, dotted with cattle, while the rugged bluffs provided a dramatic backdrop. It was beautiful in a stark, untamed way. She turned back to the house with determination. Over the next several hours, Violet worked methodically through the main floor, dusting, sweeping, and scrubbing. The kitchen received special attention. She scoured the stove until the cast iron gleamed, organized the pantry, and washed every dish and utensil. By mid-afternoon, she had made significant progress, though many tasks remained. The parlor needed a thorough cleaning, the study was cluttered with papers and books that required sorting, and she had yet to address the upstairs rooms. Taking a brief break, Violet explored the grounds immediately surrounding the house. Behind the kitchen was a small, overgrown garden plot salvageable with work, she noted, and a chicken coop with a dozen healthy-looking hens. A clothesline stretched between two posts, and a path led down to a clear creek about 50 yards from the house. The sound of hoofbeats announced Noah's return earlier than expected. He dismounted in the yard, leaving his horse tied to the hitching post while Lewis and Marco continued toward the barn with their mounts. "Everything all right?" Violet asked, coming out onto the porch. "Fine. Job went quicker than I thought." Noah removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "You've been busy," he observed, noting her flour-dusted apron and slightly disheveled appearance. "The kitchen's habitable again," she said with a hint of pride. "And I've made bread." Noah followed her inside, stopping in the doorway to the kitchen with an expression of astonishment. The room was transformed, surfaces gleamed, dishes were neatly arranged on shelves, and the scent of fresh bread filled the air. "Mrs. Nash, this is." He seemed at a loss for words. "A start," she finished for him. "There's plenty more to do." Noah shook his head, a genuine smile breaking across his face for the first time since she'd met him. The expression transformed his features, softening the hard lines and bringing a warmth to his eyes that caught Violet by surprise. "If this is just a start, I can't wait to see the finish," he said. Then, as if suddenly aware of his casual manner, he straightened and cleared his throat. "I should clean up before supper." "There's hot water on the stove," Violet told him, "and I'll have a meal ready in half an hour." As the days passed, Violet settled into a routine at the Granger ranch. Each morning, she rose early to prepare breakfast before Noah and his hands headed out for the day's work. The hours while they were gone were filled with household tasks: laundry, baking, cleaning, mending. By the end of her first week, the transformation of the house was remarkable. Dust and disorder had given way to cleanliness and order, and the once neglected rooms had taken on a new vitality. Noah noticed the changes, though he spoke of them only in brief, sometimes awkward compliments. "Place hasn't looked this good since." "Well, ever," he said one evening as they sat down to a supper of roast beef and vegetables from a nearby farm. "Thank you," Violet replied. "I've been thinking about curtains for the parlor. The ones there now are faded and don't quite fit the windows." Noah looked surprised. "You want to sew new curtains, if that's all right. I found some suitable fabric in the storeroom. I believe it was meant for that purpose but never used." That would be Mrs. Abernathy's doing. She was always planning improvements she never got around to. Noah considered for a moment. "Do whatever you think best. It's your domain now." The casual statement gave Violet pause. Her domain. The words suggested a permanence, an ownership of sorts that went beyond their arrangement. She reminded herself that this was still merely employment, a contract that would end in a year's time. But she couldn't deny the small thrill of satisfaction that came with being entrusted with Noah's home. As autumn deepened, bringing cooler weather and shorter days, Violet found herself growing increasingly comfortable in her new surroundings. The house, once just a place where she performed her duties, began to feel like a home. She took pride in each improvement, each touch that made the spaces more welcoming and functional. Noah, too, seemed to relax in her presence. Their initially stilted conversations over meals gradually became more natural, even enjoyable. He told her about the cattle business, the challenges of ranching in the sometimes harsh Nebraska climate, and his plans for expanding his operations. In turn, Violet shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, her journey west with her parents when she was 15, and occasionally, carefully, memories of her brief marriage to Thomas. "How did you meet your husband?" Noah asked one evening as they sat by the fireplace after supper, Violet mending a shirt while Noah went over his ledgers. The question caught her off guard. They rarely spoke of Thomas by unspoken mutual agreement. "At a barn raising," she answered after a moment. "My father's barn." Thomas was new to the area, just starting his farm. "He was strong and hardworking, and he made me laugh." "You loved him," Noah said, a statement rather than a question. "Yes." Violet kept her eyes on her stitching. "It was very fast. We only courted for 3 months before we married. My father thought it too hasty, but I was certain." She paused, then added softly, "We were still learning each other when he died." Noah set down his pencil, his expression thoughtful. "I'm sorry, it's a hard country for women alone." "It's a hard country for anyone alone," Violet replied, meeting his gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of shared solitude. Noah was the first to look away, returning his attention to his books with a small nod that might have been agreement. The first real test of their developing rapport came a week later, when Violet fell ill with a fever. She tried to rise at her usual hour, but dizziness overtook her as soon as she stood, and she found herself sitting heavily on the edge of her bed, room spinning. Noah, heading out for early chores, was alarmed when she didn't appear for breakfast. He found her attempting to dress despite her obvious illness. "Mrs. Nash, you should be in bed," he said firmly, standing awkwardly in her doorway. "The breakfast, the laundry." Violet protested weakly. "Can wait." Noah approached cautiously, as if uncertain of the propriety of being in her room. "You're burning up with fever." Before she could argue further, another wave of dizziness washed over her, and she swayed dangerously. Noah was beside her in an instant, one strong arm supporting her shoulders while the other felt her forehead. "Back to bed," he ordered, his voice gentler than his words. "I'll ride for the doctor." "No need," Violet murmured. "Just a chill, had them before." Noah ignored her protests, helping her back under the covers before striding from the room with purpose. Through her feverish haze, Violet heard him giving instructions to Lewis, followed by the sound of hoofbeats racing away from the house. The next hours passed in a blur of discomfort and confusion. Violet drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of cool compresses being placed on her forehead and a deep voice murmuring reassurances. At one point, she opened her eyes to find not only Noah but also an elderly man with kind eyes examining her. "Influenza, I'd wager," the doctor was saying to Noah. "Nothing too serious if we keep the fever down. Plenty of fluids, rest. Will she recover fully?" Noah's voice held a tension Violet hadn't heard before. "Strong young woman like her, certainly, but she'll need care for a few days." When Violet next became fully aware of her surroundings, the room was dim, lit only by a small lamp on the bedside table. Noah sat in a chair beside her bed, his head bowed as if in sleep or prayer. The sight was so unexpected that for a moment Violet wondered if she was still dreaming. "Mr. Granger," she whispered. His head snapped up immediately. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Weak, thirsty." Her voice was a rasp. Noah reached for a glass of water on the table, helping her sit up enough to drink. His hands were surprisingly gentle for a man who worked with cattle and horses all day. "The doctor says you'll be fine with rest," he told her as she sank back against the pillows. "Lewis's wife, Elena, is coming tomorrow to help care for you." "I'm sorry to be a burden," Violet murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. "You're not a burden," Noah said firmly. "You've done nothing but work since you arrived. Everyone falls ill sometimes." As promised, Elena Mendoza arrived the next morning, a cheerful, plump woman who took charge of Violet's care with motherly efficiency. Under her ministrations, and with continued, if awkward, attention from Noah, Violet's health improved rapidly. By the third day, she was able to sit up in bed for extended periods, and by the fifth, she insisted on coming downstairs for meals. Noah watched her progress with a vigilance that both touched and puzzled Violet. He seemed genuinely concerned for her welfare, beyond what might be expected from an employer worried about a servant's ability to work. "You don't need to fuss," she told him when she caught him bringing extra blankets to the parlor where she was resting. "I'm much better now." "Just following the doctor's orders," Noah replied, but there was something in his expression, a softness, a hesitancy that made Violet wonder if there was more to his attentiveness than mere duty. The illness changed something between them. Noah's careful reserve seemed to have cracked, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the stern rancher's exterior. He began to share more of himself during their evening conversation, stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west after the Civil War, his dream of building a cattle empire in the Nebraska Territory. "Were you a soldier?" Violet asked one evening, curious about the war years he rarely mentioned. Noah's expression darkened slightly. "Union cavalry, enlisted in '62, fought till the end. It must have been terrible," she said softly, noting the shadow that crossed his face. "War always is." He stared into the fire. "Saw things no man should see, did things no man should have to do." After a long pause, he added, "That's why I came west afterward. Needed open skies and clean air, a fresh start. And you found it here." "I did." Noah's gaze shifted from the flames to her face. "Most days I can almost forget." Almost? The vulnerability in his admission touched Violet deeply. She understood the need to outrun ghosts, to build something new from the ashes of the past. Without thinking, she reached across the space between them and laid her hand on his. Noah looked startled by the gesture but didn't pull away. For a long moment, they sat in silence, connected by that simple touch and by the quiet understanding that flowed between them. It was Noah who finally broke the spell, clearing his throat and withdrawing his hand. "It's getting late," he said, rising from his chair. "You still need your rest." Violet nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Good night, Mr. Granger. Good night, Mrs. Nash." He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. I'm glad you're feeling better. As winter settled over the Nebraska plains, bringing howling blizzards that confined them to the house for days at a time, the boundaries between employer and employee, between contracted servant and master, blurred further. Out of necessity, they worked together on tasks that would normally have been divided by gender, Noah helping with indoor chores when the weather was too fierce for outdoor work, Violet assisting with caring for animals that had been brought into the barn for shelter. During one particularly brutal storm, they spent an entire day in the kitchen, Violet teaching Noah to make bread while the wind screamed around the eaves. "You're pressing too hard," she laughed, watching him manhandle the dough. "It needs a gentle touch." "Gentle isn't exactly my specialty," Noah admitted, flour dusting his forearms. "Here." Violet moved to stand beside him, her hands covering his to demonstrate the proper kneading technique. "Like this, firm but not rough." The physical closeness sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the heat from the cook stove. She became acutely aware of Noah's height, the breadth of his shoulders, the clean scent of soap and man that surrounded him. When she glanced up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For one suspended moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, hands joined in the simple task of bread making, bodies close enough to feel the heat emanating from one another. Noah's expression softened, his eyes dropping briefly to her lips in a way that sent her heart racing. Then a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, breaking the spell. Violet stepped back, brushing flour from her apron with hands that weren't quite steady. "You've got the idea now," she said, her voice betraying her only by its slight breathlessness. "Just keep working it until it's smooth." Noah nodded, returning his attention to the dough with perhaps more concentration than the task required. "Thank you for the lesson, Mrs. Nash." The formality of the address struck Violet as suddenly absurd after all they had shared. "I think, perhaps under the circumstances, you might call me Violet." Noah's hands stilled, and he looked up at her with surprise that quickly gave way to something warmer. "I'd like that, and I'm Noah." Such a simple exchange, the sharing of first names, and yet it felt momentous, another barrier between them gently dismantled. As winter deepened, these moments of connection multiplied. They read together by lamplight during the long evenings, Noah introducing Violet to authors she'd never encountered, Violet sharing her love of poetry. They played checkers and card games, Noah teaching her poker while she taught him a card game her grandmother had played. They talked about books, about the ranch, about their hopes for the future, conversations that stretched late into the night, neither seeming eager to end them. And always, beneath these growing bonds of friendship, ran an undercurrent of something more: attention, an awareness that manifested in lingering glances, in the careful way they avoided touching casually, in the sudden silences that fell between them at unexpected moments. Violet knew she was treading dangerous ground. Her position was precarious, a contracted servant with nowhere else to go if things went wrong. Noah had been nothing but respectful, but she had no illusions about the power imbalance between them. More than that, she feared her own heart. Thomas had been gone less than a year. Was she betraying his memory by feeling this pull toward another man? Yet she couldn't deny the growing truth. She was falling in love with Noah Granger, with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness, with his integrity and the vulnerability he showed only to her, with the life he had built out of nothing but determination and hard work. What she couldn't know, what she feared to discover, was whether Noah felt the same, or if she was merely a convenient presence in his home, a temporary arrangement that would end when her contract was fulfilled. The question haunted her as Christmas approached. Noah had ridden to Scottsbluff for supplies, promising to return with a surprise or two for the holiday. Violet used his absence to prepare her own surprise: a new shirt she had sewn for him from fine wool cloth she'd found in the storeroom, adding intricate stitching at the collar and cuffs. It was the kind of personal gift that might be considered too intimate, but after nearly 3 months of sharing a home, it felt appropriate. She was hanging the last of the pine, bough decorations she'd gathered from the woods behind the house when the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Noah's return. Peering through the frosted window, she saw not only Noah but also Louis and Marco, all three men laden with packages. Reinforcements, Noah explained with a grin as he stamped snow from his boots in the entryway. Too many supplies for one man to carry. The Mendoza brothers greeted Violet warmly before helping to unload the bounty bags of flour and sugar, coffee beans, dried fruit, a ham, and more mysterious parcels that Noah quickly sequestered in his study. "No peeking," he warned Violet with mock severity when he caught her eyeing the hidden gifts. "Christmas is still 3 days away." Those 3 days passed in a flurry of preparation and anticipation. Violet baked cookies and pies, prepared a Christmas Eve feast, and put the finishing touches on Noah's gift. Noah disappeared into the barn for hours at a time, presumably working on his own mysterious project. Christmas Eve brought a break in the winter weather, a clear, cold night with stars blazing overhead. After a sumptuous dinner, Noah surprised Violet by producing a small fir tree he had apparently been hiding in the barn. "I thought we could decorate it tonight," he said, almost shyly. "It's a tradition my mother always kept." Together, they adorned the tree with paper ornaments Violet had crafted, strings of dried berries, and small candles that Noah carefully attached to the branches. When they had finished, he lit the candles one by one, and they stood back to admire the effect, the small tree glowing with warm light against the backdrop of the dark winter night beyond the windows. "It's beautiful," Violet whispered, moved by the simple beauty of the scene and by the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. "Merry Christmas, Violet," Noah said softly, standing close beside her. She turned to find him watching her, his expression open and warm in the candlelight. "Merry Christmas, Noah." Something shifted between them in that moment, a mutual recognition that whatever was growing between them had moved beyond the boundaries of their original arrangement. Noah's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a naturalness that belied the significance of the gesture. "I have something for you," he said, "but it can wait until morning." Violet shook her head. "I'd like to see it now if that's all right, and I have something for you as well." They exchanged gifts by the light of the Christmas tree, Noah presenting Violet with a beautiful leather-bound journal and a silver hairpin that had belonged to his mother, Violet giving Noah the shirt she had made with such care. "This is exquisite," Noah marveled, running his fingers over the detailed stitching. "You made this yourself?" "I did," Violet confirmed, pleased by his obvious appreciation. "I noticed your others were getting worn. No one's made me clothing since I was a boy." He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the candle flames. "Thank you. It means more than I can say." Impulsively, Violet reached up to touch his cheek. "You're welcome." Noah caught her hand, holding it against his face for a moment before turning to press a kiss to her palm. The gesture, so tender and unexpected, sent a tremor through her. "Violet," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know if this is right or proper, considering our arrangement, but I need to tell you something." Her heart pounded as she waited for him to continue. "These past months with you here, they've changed me, changed this place." Noah still held her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her skin. "Before you came, this was just a house. Now it's a home. Noah, please let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I know you're here because of a contract, because circumstances left you with few options. I know your heart still carries grief for your husband, but I need you to know that when that contract ends, I don't want you to go, not unless it's what you truly want." Violet felt tears spring to her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Violet Nash. Not as a man who owns a year of your service, but as a man who admires your strength, your kindness, your spirit. I'm saying that if you could ever feel something for me beyond obligation, I would count myself the luckiest man in Nebraska Territory." The words, spoken with such earnest vulnerability, broke through the last of Violet's hesitation. "Noah, I already do. Feel something for you, I mean. Something I never expected to feel again after Thomas died." Hope blazed in Noah's eyes. "You do?" "I do." Violet moved closer, emboldened by his declaration. "I've been fighting it, telling myself it was too soon, that it wasn't appropriate given our situation. But the truth is, I've fallen in love with you too. Noah's smile was radiant as he gently framed her face with his hands. "May I kiss you, Violet?" Her answer was to rise on tiptoe, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began softly, almost reverently, before deepening into something more passionate. Noah's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while Violet's hands found their way to his shoulders, then his hair. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Noah rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for months," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" Violet asked, her fingers still threaded through his dark hair. "I needed to be sure you were here because you wanted to be, not because you had no choice." His expression grew serious. "Violet, I want to be perfectly clear. Your contract is void as of this moment. You're free to stay or go as you choose. If you stay, it's as an equal, not as someone I purchased at an auction." The gesture moved her deeply. "I choose to stay," she said without hesitation. "This is where I want to be, with you." Noah's kiss this time was jubilant, lifting her off her feet and spinning her in a circle that made her laugh with surprised delight. When he set her down, his expression had sobered slightly. "There's something else I need to ask, though it may be too soon." He took her hands in his. "Violet Nash, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not today, not tomorrow, but when you're ready." Violet's heart swelled with emotion. 6 months ago, she had stood on an auction block, facing a future of servitude or worse. Now she was being offered a life built on love and respect, with a man who saw her as an equal partner. "Yes," she answered, her voice steady and sure. "I will marry you, Noah Granger, and I don't need to wait. I know what's in my heart." Christmas morning dawned clear and brilliant, sunlight sparkling on fresh snow that had fallen during the night. Violet woke to find Noah already up, preparing coffee in the kitchen with an endearing concentration. "You're supposed to let me do that," she teased, coming up behind him. He turned, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Can't a man make coffee for the woman he loves on Christmas morning?" Violet's heart gave a little leap at the casual way he spoke of his love. "I suppose he can," she conceded, accepting the cup he offered. They spent the day in a kind of blissful bubble, reveling in their new understanding. They exchanged more gifts, practical ones this time, like warm gloves for Noah and a set of hairpins for Violet, and shared a lavish Christmas dinner. In the evening, they bundled up and walked out under the stars, Noah showing Violet constellations she'd never learned to identify. "That's Orion," he said, pointing to a distinctive pattern of stars. "The Hunter." "And that bright one?" Violet asked, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Sirius, the dog star." Noah's arm tightened around her shoulders. "My father taught me the stars when I was a boy, said a man who could read the sky would never be truly lost." "Your father sounds like a wise man." He was. Noah's voice held a mixture of pride and old grief. "Lost him and my mother to influenza the year before the war. I was 18, suddenly on my own." Violet leaned into him, offering silent comfort. "That's too young to lose both parents." "It was hard," Noah admitted, "but it taught me to stand on my own, to make my own way." He looked down at her, his expression softening. "I never thought I'd find someone to share that way with. Not until you." They sealed the sentiment with a kiss beneath the vast Nebraska sky, the cold forgotten in the warmth they created between them. The weeks that followed were filled with a joy that neither had expected to find. They didn't rush to announce their engagement, choosing instead to savor the private knowledge between themselves. Noah continued his work on the ranch while Violet maintained the house, but everything was transformed by the understanding that they were building a future together. Their evenings took on a new dimension, conversations flowing easily between topics practical and profound. They discussed how they would run the ranch together, Violet contributing ideas that Noah readily embraced. They shared dreams for expansion, for improvements to the house and property, for the family they both hoped to create. Physical affection became a natural part of their interaction, hands clasped over the dinner table. A kiss in greeting when Noah returned from his work, an embrace before retiring to their separate rooms at night. They were both committed to waiting for marriage before taking that final step, though the waiting grew more difficult as their feelings deepened. "Spring wedding," Noah suggested one evening in late January as they sat before the fire. April, perhaps. The bluffs are beautiful then, with the first wildflowers. April would be perfect, Violet agreed, nestled against his side. Nothing elaborate, just us, the Mendozas, perhaps a few neighbors, and the circuit preacher. Anything you want, Noah promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. Though I must admit, April seems a long way off, Violet laughed, understanding his impatience because she shared it. It's only 3 months, we can be patient. February brought a thaw, and with it, unexpected visitors. Violet was kneading bread when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Looking out the window, she saw 2 men riding into the yard, strangers, their manner suggesting official business. Noah was out with the cattle, but she knew he would return soon for the midday meal. Wiping her hands on her apron, Violet went to the door to greet the visitors. "Good day, gentlemen," she called from the porch. "Can I help you?" The older of the 2 men removed his hat, revealing graying hair and a weathered face. "Madam, I'm looking for Noah Granger. He's out with the herd but should return shortly. May I ask who's calling?" "Judge Amos Holden, madam, from the Territorial Court. This is Deputy Marshal Fletcher." The judge gestured to his companion, a younger man with a star pinned to his coat. "And you would be Violet Nash," she hesitated, unsure how to explain her presence. "I'm Mr. Granger's housekeeper." Something in the judge's expression made her uneasy. "Nash, widow of Thomas Nash from Silver Creek," surprised. Violet nodded. "Yes, that's right." The judge exchanged a significant look with the marshal. "Interesting. We'd very much like to speak with Mr. Granger when he returns." "Might we wait inside, Mrs. Nash? It's a matter of some importance." Unease growing, Violet nonetheless nodded and showed them into the parlor. She served coffee and the fresh bread she'd been preparing, trying to maintain a calm exterior while her mind raced with questions. How did the judge know her name? What business could bring territorial officials all the way to Noah's ranch? Noah returned a half-hour later, his surprise at finding visitors evident as he entered the house. "Judge Holden," he said, recognition and wariness mingling in his tone. "What brings you out this way, Mr. Granger?" The judge rose. "We need to discuss a serious matter concerning Mrs. Nash here." Noah's gaze flicked to Violet, concern evident. "What about Mrs. Nash? We've received a complaint from Silver Creek about the nature of her employment here." The judge's tone made the words sound distasteful. Specifically about how that employment was arranged, understanding dawned on Noah's face. "The auction," he said flatly. "Yes, the auction, which, I must inform you, was entirely illegal." Judge Holden's expression hardened. "Human servitude contracts were outlawed in this territory 5 years ago, Mr. Granger. I'm surprised a man of your standing wasn't aware of that fact." Noah's jaw tightened. "I was aware. That's precisely why I participated to prevent Mrs. Nash from falling into a situation that would have been far worse." "A noble sentiment," the judge acknowledged with a nod. "But the law is the law. Such contracts cannot be enforced, regardless of the intentions behind them." "There is no contract anymore," Violet interjected, unable to remain silent. "Noah, Mr. Granger voided it weeks ago." The marshal, who had been quietly observing until now, spoke up. "That may be, madam, but we're also here about a more serious allegation. Mayor Willard of Silver Creek claims that Mr. Granger effectively purchased you for immoral purposes." Noah's face flushed with anger. "That's a damned lie. I've treated Mrs. Nash with nothing but respect." "Noah," Violet said quickly, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Please." She turned to the officials. "Gentlemen, I can assure you that Mr. Granger has been a perfect gentleman. I've been treated well, paid fairly for my work, and given comfortable accommodations." The judge studied her closely. "And you remain here of your own free will, Mrs. Nash?" "You're under no coercion or threat, none whatsoever." Violet drew herself up, meeting his gaze directly. "In fact, Mr. Granger and I are engaged to be married." This announcement clearly caught the officials by surprise. The judge's eyebrows rose while the marshal coughed into his fist. "I see," Judge Holden said after a moment. "That does put a different complexion on things." "Judge," Noah said, his voice calmer now, "I won't deny that I participated in that auction, but I did so only to help a woman in desperate straits, not to take advantage of her. The fact that we've since developed genuine feelings for each other is separate from that initial arrangement." The judge nodded slowly. I believe you, Mr. Granger. However, there's still the matter of the illegal auction itself. The officials of Silver Creek need to be held accountable. I agree completely, Noah said firmly. Mayor Willard and his council should face consequences for what they've done, not just to Violet, but to who knows how many other women in similar circumstances. Would you be willing to testify about what happened, Mrs. Nash? The marshal asked. Your statement would be valuable evidence. Violet hesitated, the thought of revisiting that humiliating day making her stomach churn. But then she thought of other women who might still be suffering under similar arrangements, without the good fortune she had found with Noah. Yes, she said resolutely. I'll testify. Those men need to be stopped. The judge seemed satisfied with this. Very good. We'll be in touch about when your testimony will be needed. In the meantime, he added, his expression softening slightly, congratulations on your engagement. When is the happy day? April, Noah answered, moving to stand beside Violet, his hand finding hers. If you're in the area, Judge, you'd be welcome to attend. After the officials departed, promising to return within the month to take Violet's formal statement, Noah pulled her into a fierce embrace. I'm sorry, he murmured against her hair. I never imagined this would come back to haunt us. It's not your fault, Violet assured him, drawing back to meet his gaze. If anything, this might help ensure no other woman faces what I did. Noah nodded, though concern still shadowed his eyes. Willard won't go down without a fight, and he's got friends in the territory. Then we'll face them together, Violet said with determination. I'm not afraid, Noah, not anymore. The anticipated legal proceedings brought unexpected changes to their plans. Judge Holden returned in early March, informing them that Mayor Willard and several town council members from Silver Creek had been arrested and would stand trial in Omaha at the end of the month. Violet would need to travel there to testify. I'll come with you, Noah said immediately when she told him the news. We can be married in Omaha after the trial. Violet considered this, then shook her head. No, I don't want our wedding associated with that unpleasantness. Let's stick to our original plan here in April when the wildflowers bloom on the bluffs. Noah studied her face. You're sure? I don't like the thought of you facing those men alone. I won't be alone. The judge and marshal will be there. She squeezed his hand. And I'll carry your strength with me. This is something I need to do, Noah, for myself and for others who might have suffered as I did. Reluctantly, Noah agreed. Arrangements were made for Violet to travel to Omaha with Judge Holden and Marshal Fletcher, the journey to take place in the third week of March. As the day of departure approached, Violet alternated between determination and dread. The prospect of confronting Mayor Willard and recounting the degrading experience of the auction filled her with anxiety, but the thought of preventing other women from suffering the same fate strengthened her resolve. The night before she was to leave, Noah presented her with a small box. A gift, he said, to remind you of home while you're away. Inside, Violet found a delicate gold locket. Opening it, she discovered a tiny sketch of the ranch house on one side and on the other a lock of Noah's dark hair. Noah, she breathed, deeply touched by the sentiment. It's beautiful. So you don't forget what's waiting for you here, he said, helping her fasten the chain around her neck. As if I could forget, Violet replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. I'll be back before you know it, and then nothing will ever separate us again. The journey to Omaha took 3 days by stagecoach. Judge Holden proved to be a considerate traveling companion, regaling Violet with stories of his early days on the bench to distract her from her nervousness. Marshal Fletcher was quieter, but offered reassurance in his steady presence and occasional kind word. Omaha itself was larger and busier than any place Violet had seen since leaving Ohio. The judge arranged for her to stay with his sister, a widow who lived in a comfortable house near the courthouse. Mrs. Pemberton welcomed Violet warmly, offering both practical support and maternal comfort in the days leading up to the trial. The courtroom was intimidating: high ceilings, polished wood, and rows of stern-faced men in formal attire. Violet's hands trembled as she took the oath, but when she began to speak, she found her voice growing stronger with each word. She recounted the foreclosure of her farm after Thomas's death, the auction arranged by Mayor Willard, and the degrading experience of being sold like livestock. "And did Mr. Granger participate in this auction?" the prosecutor asked. "He did," Violet acknowledged. "But unlike the others, his intent was to help me, not exploit me. He provided a safe home and respectable employment. And now you're engaged to be married." "Yes." Violet couldn't help the smile that touched her lips. "We fell in love. But that came later, after he had already freed me from our initial arrangement." Mayor Willard, sitting at the defense table, glared at her throughout her testimony. When his turn came to speak, he attempted to justify the auction as a charitable arrangement for widows with no other means of support. "We were helping these women," he insisted, "providing them with homes and employment when they had nothing, by selling them like chattel." The judge countered sharply. "The law is clear, Mr. Willard. Such practices are not only immoral but illegal." The trial lasted 3 days. In the end, Mayor Willard and 3 council members were convicted of multiple violations of territorial law. Their sentences, substantial fines and removal from office, were less severe than Violet had hoped, but still represented a victory for justice. As she prepared to return to the ranch, Violet felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The past had been confronted and, if not fully laid to rest, at least addressed in a way that might prevent future abuses. The return journey seemed interminable, her eagerness to be home to be with Noah growing with each passing mile. When the stagecoach finally crested the rise that revealed the sprawling landscape of the ranch, Violet's heart leapt at the sight of a rider galloping toward them. Noah reined his horse alongside the stage, his face alight with joy and relief. "Violet." The coach had barely stopped before she was out the door and in his arms, all propriety forgotten in the happiness of reunion. "I've missed you," she whispered against his chest. "Not half as much as I've missed you," Noah replied, holding her as if he never intended to let go again. "How did it go?" "They were convicted, removed from office." Violet drew back enough to see his face. "It's over, Noah, truly over." His smile was radiant as he lifted her onto his horse, mounting behind her for the ride back to the house. "Then let's go home and plan a wedding." The 2 weeks before their wedding day passed in a flurry of preparations. Word spread quickly about the upcoming nuptials, and neighbors from miles around sent congratulations and offers of assistance. Elena Mendoza took charge of organizing food for the celebration, while other ranch wives contributed decorations, music, and practical gifts for the newlyweds. Violet worked on her wedding dress in the evenings, a simple but elegant gown of ivory muslin with lace trim she had carefully preserved from her mother's wedding dress. Noah, meanwhile, ordered a new suit from Scottsbluff and spent long hours completing a secret project in the barn that he refused to let Violet see. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of spring across the plains. As promised, wildflowers dotted the bluffs behind the house, painting the landscape in delicate purples, yellows, and whites. Violet dressed with Elena's help, her heart fluttering with anticipation rather than nervousness. This day, this marriage, felt right in a way that defied explanation, as if all the hardship and loss she had endured had been leading her to this moment, to this man. The ceremony was to take place on the grassy area between the house and the bluffs, where Noah had constructed a simple wooden arch entwined with early spring flowers and ribbons. Guests began arriving mid-morning, neighboring ranchers and their families, shopkeepers from Scottsbluff, and even Judge Holden, who had ridden from Omaha to perform the ceremony. When it was time, Violet emerged from the house to find nearly 50 people gathered to witness their vows. A path had been created between the assembled guests, leading to where Noah stood beneath the arch, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in his new suit and freshly trimmed hair. Luis Mendoza, serving as Noah's best man, nudged him, and Noah turned. The expression that crossed his face when he saw Violet, wonder, love, and a kind of stunned gratitude, was one she knew she would remember for the rest of her life. The simple ceremony unfolded in the warm spring sunshine, their voices clear and steady as they exchanged vows. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Noah's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with feasting, dancing, and heartfelt toasts to the bride and groom. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the rolling grasslands, Noah took Violet's hand and led her away from the festivities. "I have something to show you," he said, guiding her toward the barn. "My wedding gift to you." Inside, illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns, stood a beautifully crafted rocking chair. Noah had obviously spent many hours on it, the wood polished to a rich gleam, the back and arms intricately carved with a pattern of wildflowers. "Noah," Violet breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's exquisite." "I wanted to give you something that would last," he said, watching her face with tender attention. "Something that might someday rock our children to sleep." The thought of their children filled Violet with a warmth that spread through her entire being. "It's perfect," she said, turning to embrace him. "Thank you." "Thank you," Noah replied, his voice rough with emotion, "for bringing life and love back into my world." As the last of the guests departed, calling final congratulations and good wishes, Noah swept Violet into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their house. Now truly a home they would share as husband and wife. Later, as moonlight spilled through the bedroom window, Noah held Violet close, their bodies still warm from the culmination of their love. "Happy?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Completely," she answered without hesitation. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible." Noah pressed a kiss to her forehead. "When I stood up at that auction and said home awaits, I had no idea how true those words would become. You've made this place a home in every sense." Violet nestled closer, her heart full of contentment and hope for the future. "And it always will be, my love, for both of us." The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but also immeasurable joy. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, Noah's practical knowledge complemented by Violet's keen business sense. They expanded their holdings, added modern improvements to the house, and earned a reputation throughout the territory for fair dealings and generous hospitality. Their first child, a son they named William Thomas Granger, arrived a year after their wedding, a strong, healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's vivid blue eyes. A daughter, Emma Rose, followed 2 years later, and then another son, James, the year after that. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Noah surprised Violet with a trip to San Francisco, a journey that opened their eyes to possibilities beyond the ranch and led to new ventures in cattle breeding, and eventually, railroad investments that secured their family's prosperity for generations to come. Through it all, they remained each other's strength and solace, their love deepening with each passing year. The ranch became known as a haven for those in need. Travelers were welcomed. Orphan children found homes with neighboring families through their arrangements, and more than one widow found employment and dignity under their roof. On warm summer evenings, long after the children were grown with families of their own, Noah and Violet could still be found sitting together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the bluffs in shades of gold and purple. Their hands would be clasped, weathered now with age but still finding the same comfort in each other's touch that they had discovered so many years before. "Do you ever think about that auction?" Noah asked once, during their 35th year of marriage. "Do you ever regret how we began?" Violet considered the question, then shook her head. "How could I regret the path that led me here? To you, to our children, to this life we've built?" Noah's smile, still capable of warming her heart after all these years, was tender as he lifted her hand to his lips. "Home awaits," he murmured, echoing the words he had spoken on that fateful day. "No, my love," Violet corrected gently, leaning in to kiss him as the last rays of sunlight gilded the land around them. "Home is here. It always has been, from the moment we found each other." And in the soft Nebraska twilight, surrounded by the legacy of love they had created together, they knew it was the truest thing either of them had ever said.